CBS's Elementary is one of, if not the best, modern Sherlock Holmes adaptations, and it's partially because of the way it fixed Sherlock's major Watson issue. It's not often that an American remake of an iconic British story fares as well as Robert Doherty's Elementary did. All the changes it made to the source material worked in the show's favor. This includes the way the New York set Elementary handled Lucy Liu's gender-bent version of Dr. John Watson, Joan Watson, Sherlock Holmes's closest friend and investigative partner. There are many reasons to love Martin Freeman's performance as Watson in the BBC's Sherlock, including his chemistry with Benedict Cumberbatch, his empathy, and his undeniably expressive face. Even so, Elementary did something Sherlock was never able to. Sherlock Holmes isn't nearly as interesting a character without a version of Watson to act as their confidant and sounding board. Liu's Joan became so much more than that, though, and it made Elementary a more intriguing and worthwhile endeavor than most other recent Sherlock Holmes adaptations. Elementary treated Sherlock and Watson's relationship better than the BBC's show. Elementary Joan and Sherlock. While Cumberbatch and Freeman's partnership as Holmes and Watson came to define the BBC's version of Sherlock, their relationship was still wholly based on the source material. John's medical expertise helped Sherlock, sure, and John was there for the great detective whenever he needed a friend, but their relationship was still relatively one-sided. Freeman's version of Watson never had much of a life outside his unconventional friendship with Sherlock. Even once he got into a romantic relationship with Amanda Abbington's Mary, most of Watson's world was still controlled, as it were, by Sherlock and his issues. The BBC's Sherlock may have been willing to do anything to save Watson, and vice versa, but Sherlock couldn't give his friend the agency he deserved. In some ways, Watson was trapped by his friendship with Sherlock. Their relationship was rather toxic, even in this modern, updated version of the story. Elementary, on the other hand, gave Liu's Watson much more independence. She wasn't just a sounding board for Johnny Lee Miller's rough-around-the-edges Sherlock. She was his pupil, his partner, instrumental in solving cases, even beyond her medical knowledge. She even became an independent detective. Sherlock acknowledged her as his equal, and she felt comfortable and safe enough to set boundaries in their relationship whenever necessary. In both shows, Sherlock becomes a better person for having known Watson. Elementary ensured that both Sherlock and Watson benefited personally from their relationship, however, depicting their dynamic as a two-way street. That not only made Watson a more interesting character but also improved Sherlock's characterization. How Elementary's Joan Watson was different from Sherlock's John Watson. Lucy Liu as Joan Watson in Elementary. Aside from the most obvious differences between Sherlock's John and Elementary's Joan, their gender, style, employment background, professional aspirations, and more, one of the reasons Elementary could explore a new kind of relationship between Sherlock and Watson was because of the way they introduced Joan into Holmes's life. In Sherlock, John is initially viewed by Holmes as a means to an end, just as Holmes views everyone in his life as a means to an end. John is merely a war vet looking for an apartment, nothing more. It's not until John reveals his curiosity and need for adventure and excitement that Sherlock begins to see him as something else. In Elementary, Joan is originally introduced as Sherlock's sober companion. This puts her on more equal footing with him. She'd been hired by his father, Morland Holmes, John Noble, to keep an eye on him. Sherlock might still have been the famous one, the greatest detective in the world, but Sherlock wasn't calling the shots from the beginning. This gave Joan the space to grow into her new vocation and gain Holmes's trust in a fresh and arguably more intimate way than in any previous version of the Sherlock Holmes story. Sherlock, meanwhile, learned to open up to someone like never before, and it's understandable why. While Liu's Watson was warm and inviting, she was also steadfast and strong. She was exactly who Sherlock needed after his stint in rehab, and their shared trauma, Joan was still getting over the death of a patient, brought them closer together. Elementary had one clear advantage over Sherlock. Elementary Joan Watson and Sherlock Holmes. All that being said, Elementary did have one massive advantage over Sherlock, which allowed Liu's Watson and Miller's Holmes to grow closer than Cumberbatch and Freeman's duo ever did. Most British detective and mystery shows feature fewer than a handful of episodes per season. Sherlock only ever produced a total of 13 episodes, including the 2016 Victorian-era Christmas special, The Abominable Bride. Each episode was roughly an hour and a half long, but that still didn't leave much room for close character development or an in-depth examination of Holmes and Watson's dysfunctional relationship. This was especially true in later seasons, as the conspiracies that Holmes and Watson found themselves drawn into became increasingly convoluted, requiring more screen time. Elementary, meanwhile, as a 7-season, weekly network TV procedural, produced a total of 154 episodes. The routine, case-of-the-week structure allowed for plenty of time to be devoted to Sherlock and Watson as leading characters, both independently and together. Even the dreaded filler episodes often had something to say about their relationship and growth as individuals, because each case was teaching them something new.